Hello there! Welcome to Heartpanorama, a podcast that will take you on a journey through aspects of everyday life, such as personal development, life hacks, and other relatable topics. My name is Michelle, and I'm excited to share some of my thoughts with you in this podcast series. While I talk about today's topic, I'm mentioning certain brands, products, or services. Any form of product placement in this podcast solely serves discussion purposes and is not paid or sponsored in any way. Since I recently graduated from university and I studied there for almost 7 years, I thought I'd write down everything I could think of that I would tell a freshman or my freshman self and give you a few tips on how to survive university. My first point is information. When you start your studies at university, gather all the information that you need. For example, during freshman week, I don't know if it's called that in English, but here in Germany, we have a week before the actual semester starts where everyone who starts their studies can visit courses where everything is explained that they need to know and where they can ask older students what they need to do or what they need to have organized before the semester starts. And during that week, you can find out what material you need. For example, you can get your library card. At this point, I think it's worth mentioning that I'm only speaking for my university. I don't know what other universities are like and whether they handle it the same way. But for example, when I started, I had to get my library card so I could go to the library and borrow books. And then I had to get a canteen card so I could pay my meals in the canteen. But the good thing at my university was that the library card and the canteen card were in one card. So that was quite convenient, but I had to find that out by asking the older students or the courses where they explained when you go to the library, you need a card to borrow books and so on. And then I also printed out my module plan for my whole bachelor's course when I started out. So I knew which classes I needed to go to in which semester and create my timetable off of that. Because unlike at school, you don't just get a timetable, but you have to choose your courses by yourself and organize them by yourself. So if there are 2 classes that you want to visit and that you actually need to go to, but they take place at the same time, you have to search for an alternative. So I usually tried to get all the classes that I needed on the same days, for example, so I wouldn't have to go to uni for just like 2 hours or just 4 hours and then go home and then have another day where I only go to uni for 2 hours. So I tried to put everything into one day. And yeah, you have to know which classes you have to go to before you can organize all this. So another point, my second point in this podcast is actually the people you're associated with during your studies. So my tip here is to connect with other students. For example, at freshman events, there are sometimes parties or even introduction courses where you can meet other students who also start out. And there are also sometimes groups on social media. For example, everyone from my bachelor's course and then also later from my master's course, they had a special Facebook group that everyone from the same semester could join. And there we exchanged information. For example, when a class was cancelled and only a few people knew it because they checked their emails and then they let other students know about it and so on. So this is a great opportunity to find people from your semester and get in touch with them. And also something that I told myself when I started studying at university is don't be afraid to talk to other students who, for example, sit beside you in lectures or seminars, because they're also just starting out and they also need to find people to talk to and meet new friends, and they're probably grateful if you start the conversation instead of having to start it by themselves. So don't be afraid. They're probably in the same place as you are. They're probably as afraid or nervous as you are. So there's no harm in just speaking to them. So I jumped over my shadow back then and just started asking them what their name was, introducing myself, and talking about where they came from, because a lot of students came from other cities and not from the same city that I live in, because I studied at university in the same town or city that I live in since kindergarten. And yeah, there were so many different people from different parts of the country, and it was a good opportunity to ask where they're from, to start a conversation, for example. And it's also really helpful to have a few other students that you are in contact with on a regular basis, because, for example, when you are sick or you skip class out of a different reason, then it's always useful to have someone in that class that can send you the material of the session that you missed. And just make sure you have at least one person in every class that you have that semester that could send you something from the session, because that way you won't miss anything, even though you missed the class. And also when it comes to group projects that you sometimes have to do at uni, it is really helpful to have a few people that you get along with, because then you won't have to work on a project with complete strangers. But as the semester goes on, or in later semesters, I would advise you to get into group with people who you know you can work with, because it might affect your grades if you have to work on something that will be graded afterwards. And I have made some interesting experiences with people who I knew I got along with, but I knew weren't working properly or not as organized as I would have liked. So it's really essential to have people who work the same way as you, or who at least are up to finding compromises in something, because you all have to agree on one project or one result that you present to your teachers. And especially when it comes to grades, I think it's important to have people who want to achieve the best just as you are. And the third point I'd like to address in this podcast is just special tips that I found out during my studies. For one, figure out the printer or copying machine, because, for example, in my case, it took me a whole semester to find out that you could print on both sides. And I didn't know how to do that in the first semester, so I wasted a lot of paper. So figure out how the printer or the copying machine works so you can save paper. You can also save a lot of paper by not copying pages out from books, but finding ebook versions if your library supports these. Because, for example, at my university, there were a lot of books that you could download, and you didn't have to copy anything, but you could just read everything you needed on there. And you could also have access to a lot of research articles in digital form, and you didn't have to print them necessarily, because mostly it's enough to just read them on the screen and write down your notes and use that for your essays or your research papers, and you didn't have to print out the whole article. Especially since we're talking about saving paper and being kind to the environment, which is very important also, it is helpful to evaluate which classes or lectures you really need to print the scripts out for. For example, different professors offer their scripts from the lectures in the download portal, and you have the choice whether you want to print out 300 pages or if you just want to have them on your laptop or your tablet and take notes on your notepad, or also just digitally to save paper. And when it comes to taking notes, I actually switched between pen and paper and digital, because taking notes in digital form, for example on my laptop, helped me save a lot of paper, and also the notes are easier to arrange when you are preparing for an exam, because when I studied for an exam, I was trying to create a script where I could learn from, and then I had to combine all the notes from the lecture and everything from a course that was also part of that lecture, and I just had to combine different notes, and it was much easier to do this on digital than on paper. But pen and paper notes helped me memorizing notes better, so I sort of figured out a combination of those two to help me study best. And depending on how much and how fast I had to write down and what I was taking notes for, there are different methods that work best. For example, in lectures where you have to know these facts for an exam, it was easier to type them down on your laptop because it was much faster. And when it was just a simple note in a class where you think, oh, I don't need to take notes because it's not relevant for an exam, or you at least don't have to take as many notes as for a lecture, and you just want to write things down because they're interesting to you. So I just took those notes down per hand. And what I realized in my first semesters is that unlike at school, you learn how to organize your studying by yourself at university. And the key is to know how to manage your time and prioritize your tasks. And I think that's something very important that you really have to learn in your first semesters, so you can stay organized and keep up with everything that you have to learn for your exams and also for your final thesis. So that's really a good thing to learn, and also for work later. So yeah, time management and task prioritization, these are the keys. So these are just a bunch of things that I could think of right now, but if you are interested and have questions relating to university and studying, let me know in the comments. I'd love to help out and maybe give my opinion on how you can tackle a few things. So just let me know in the comments or message me directly. I'd love to help out. That was today's episode of Heartpanorama. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a like and leave a comment. Stay tuned for upcoming podcast episodes by subscribing to my channel and activating the notification bell. Check out the links in the description to find out where else you can find me and my podcast. Have a nice week and take care. Until next time, bye!